Sophie's our legacy ambassador, and it's perfect because, as she said, Swallows and Amazons is an evergreen book. It goes on forever. It's helping children now and in the future, and that's what we hope to be doing at School Readers as well. So, Sophie, would you like to tell us about your experiences of being Titty and the making of Swallows and Amazons?
Mhm. Well, thank you for having me. It was the most extraordinary thing to happen to really a very ordinary schoolgirl at a convent. I was 12. I just started my secondary education when my parents received a letter out of the blue asking me to interview, to meet the director of this new film that was being made in the wake, really, of the Railway Children. It was being made by EMI Films. And they asked a director called Claude Wattham to make it. And I had worked for him when I was 10. And there's a photograph of me in a shabby green dress and a Fair Isle jersey. And he cast me in the very first BBC adaptation of Laurie Lee's book, Cider with Rosie. And I got that part because I could play the piano. And so there I was, age 10, somehow I practiced very, very hard and accompanied the little boy playing Laurie Lee at the parochial church concert, made on location in Slad, that's Slad School behind me, with black drapes to make it look as if it was in the dark. And it was this little part. I think I only was in front of the camera for 3 days. But I must have done whatever the director told me to do because when he was looking for a little girl to play Titty, he thought of me. And in the second slide, you can see me with my mother in the Lake District. And honestly, I had an interview in March. We were taken on a sailing audition, which was amazing, extraordinary, in Burnham on Crouch, because the producer, Richard Pilbrow, wanted to make sure that all the children appearing in the film really could sail. And my father had grown up on the Arthur Ransom books, and he was a brilliant sailor. He bought a handmade dinghy, and I'd learnt the rudiments. I was crewing for him, and I could row a boat. And in the story of Swallows and Amazons, Titty, my character, who you can see there with her little brother Roger, does rather a lot of rowing. If I look a bit peculiar in that photograph, it's because there's a huge raft attached to that dinghy, which had the camera crew on board. So as a child, as children, we had to adapt to working with a film crew. Some of them were very experienced. Neville Thompson, the online producer, had been working with Ken Russell on The Boyfriend, but he put together a very vibrant, young, talented crew. And we had Ian Whitaker, who went on to win 2 Oscars for The English Patient, I think, and E.M. Forster's Howard's End. And Terry Needham was a second assistant. He's made some of the biggest movies of all time. And there we were, these really completely unknown 6 children. But what was great was that Virginia McKenna was cast as our mother, my mother, and she had 4 children of her own. She came up to the Lake District and she got us working together as a little team. She played games with us. We played endless games of consequences. She made it fun, but she got us to concentrate. And there we are in costume. So in the story, the swallows are called the Walker family, and there's Virginia McKenna playing Mrs. Walker, with Simon West, who is a good sailor, playing Captain John, the oldest. And I don't know if you can see, but Susanna Hamilton was my sister Susan. Sten Grendon, who played Laurie Lee, was playing Roger Walker. And I was trying very hard to appear shorter because I was really too tall to play Titty. I was about 5'2", and I was taller than Simon, who was playing my older brother. So I developed kind of Titty-ish style, and I would hold my hands in front of me and try and look smaller, which was difficult in a boat, especially when we were standing in a boat. But I coped. And sometimes Simon stood on a camera box. And sometimes they dug me a trench to run down. But they cheated the fact that I was actually older than my older brother and that I was playing a 9-year-old. But it was a big part. And I think that there were a lot of complicated things that we had to do. And I think they probably needed a 12-year-old rather than a 9-year-old in that part. I had some amazing scenes alone with Virginia McKenna. Titty pretends to be Robinson Crusoe, shipwrecked on the island. And along comes her mother, and she immediately casts her in the role of Man Friday. So one day there's going to need to be a chat show, and they're going to line up all the actors who played Robinson Crusoe on movies, and I want to be there, preferably with Virginia. So Titty is a little girl with a wild imagination, and she's the one who has ideas. I had not had a good time at my primary school. I was a very slow reader. I couldn't read until I was 9. I really struggled. I needed one-to-one support, a lot of it. And I was desperate to learn to read. I tried really hard. It was so embarrassing going to children's parties. Everyone could read. I couldn't. I could write. I could do joined up writing. I could draw well. My maths was okay, but I couldn't read. And eventually, thanks to the support of wonderful, wonderful retired folk, actually, who came into school to listen to me read, or a lady in the village, I used to go to her house, I cracked the code. And once I could learn to read, I suddenly started reading. I was encouraged, I think, by my mother to read with expression. And that's from that time, I read fluently and I started devouring books like the Arthur Ransom books. And I'd read 7 books in the series of 12 by the time I was offered the part of Titty. And I prepared for the part by reading it again. And I was reading really quite fluently by then, reading a book quite quickly. My mother had been brought up on Noel Streatfeild and the book Ballet Shoes. So I think she quite wanted us to get a chance to act professionally. It was the furthest thing from my thought. I wasn't at all interested in acting. I hated my ballet lessons. I'm a rather uncoordinated person. And not that musical, although I did play the piano and the flute. And I just didn't think acting was for me at all. But what I really enjoyed was being part of the production and part of the team. And I think that all the wonderful people who taught me, and particularly those who taught me to read, had given me the confidence to work with adults who weren't my teachers. They weren't my mother's friends. We had a working relationship. So on the crew, there were about 45 men on the film crew, one woman who was the script supervisor. She did the continuity. And then back up about 30 others who would be like drivers or boatmen or the caterers on location. You have location caterers. And we had a tutor in the form of Mrs. Causey, because the film was made over the summer term when the Lake District isn't so busy. And we were obliged by law to have 3 hours of schoolwork a day. And we took our lessons in red double-decker buses, and we've got a slide of what they looked like. I'm there on the left-hand side of my sister, who came up at half term. And these route master buses that you can see in the wider shot would trundle through the Lake District and down these little lanes to the location. They'd park up, like here they're parked up on the banks of Coniston Water. In the foreground there is the producer, Richard Pearlbrow, and his wife with his dog. The second bus was used as a dining room for the crew, and they really needed that because the weather wasn't great, and they would take their lunch to eat. On the top floor of our double-decker bus, which was really quite fun, there were some bunk beds where we meant to have rests. Mum made me have a rest. She couldn't pin down the Amazons so easily. And we changed into our costumes, which were very simple, but not very warm. So when people asked me what it was like to be in Swallows and Amazons. It was quite tough, actually, and quite cold, because the costume designer, who'd actually designed the costumes for all the James Bond films, thought that it would be fun for us to go sailing in little cotton frocks. And on the front of this book, I'm wearing this little sleeveless lawn cotton frock to sail in the Lake District. Ah, anyway, we did our schooling, and it was Mum's idea, I think, but she got us to, as part of our schooling, to keep a diary. And this is Susanna Hamilton's diary. Susanna was interested in acting, and she went on to be in a lot of films like 1984 and Out of Africa. This is my diary. I wrote more. uh, and I've got 3 of these. And we also kept big fat scrapbooks with everything to do with the film in it, and they're quite interesting. So we had a black and white stills, we had a stills photographer on location every day, and he'd give us his contact sheet. So I've got quite a record of what we did every day, which was useful in the end. I don't know how I managed to keep this. So this is one of the stills from the film of us camping. And I've got news clippings in here. In those days, the 2 things were different from what nowadays. I think because social media is so tricky, you're not allowed to take behind the scenes photographs on location. In 1973, my mother did every day, although they're very expensive. And every day almost, we'd have a journalist. So there was a lot of coverage in the press, especially when Ronald Fraser came up to be play Captain Flint, because he was rather a naughty actor and always getting into scrapes and drinking far too much. And actually came up with 2 girlfriends, which my mother didn't approve of, to be our stand-ins, because we were getting quite tired, actually. I learned a lot about Beatrix Potter in my schooling. But honestly, we really battled. It was a very difficult film to make because there were very few interior scenes, and we were reliant on the Lake District weather, which is very changeable. So I've got some call sheets here. They distributed at the end of the day to the crew, and we'd have like 4 alternatives for the next day, depending on the weather. And I don't know how the boatmen coped, because we made that film on 4 different lakes and a lily pond in the Lake District. So we shot the Bowness scenes, the Rio scenes on Windermere, and in the story, the swallows are sailing to the island. They nearly hit a Victorian steamer, the Tern. That was shot on Windermere, along with the reedy scenes when the swallows are approaching the Amazon River. They were shot on Windermere. A lot of it was shot on Coniston Water, very deep lake. You get very fast winds coming up through Coniston Water, but that's where the swallows, the Walker family, they arrive and they stay at Holly Howe. And back in 1973, we were able to film at the real farm, where the real swallows, the swallows were based on a family called the Altunians, and they were 4 children, actually 3 girls and 1 boy. Oh no, 5 children, because their baby sister was with them. There are 5 children in the Walker family. 1 is age 2. And because there are 5 children, their mother can't come camping with them, you see, so they leave her with the baby and the nurse. But we were able to do all the filming at Background Farm, and you can still visit it and still have tea there or stay there. It's a guest house and they've got self-catering accommodation. But it was wonderful to start there. And then we used Peel Island on Coniston Water. But a lot of the filming was done on Derwent Water, which is a much more scenic lake, and that's where we shot all the houseboat scenes and the scenes that are set. If you watch the film trailer, the film is now it's streaming on Amazon, so Amazon Prime, so you can watch the film trailer for free, and you'll see the scenes that we shot on Derwent Water, which were like rowing out to Cormorant Island. And then, of course, we shot things like the charcoal burner scenes on the mainland, with the real charcoal burners who were still operating and burning charcoal in the Lake District at the time. So it was an amazing experience for a child, quite disciplined, quite tough. We never saw the script, which was interesting. The director, Claude Wattham, we've got a slide of him. He was really quite an avant-garde director, working for his time. There you can see him in his jean jacket. He had wore very classic clothes, had a very classic taste, and I think that he made a film that had durability, because this film of Swallows and Amazons has been broadcast on television more times than any other British film, and it's often every year it's broadcast in Australia, and it's been translated into numerous languages, mainly Northern European. So the countries where people do a lot of outdoor activities, like Czech Republic, Sweden, Norway, Finland, France, but Spain is shown in Mexico, and somewhere online you can find when it was first released in those different films, but not really in America or Canada, sadly. There's some sort of copyright reasons. So there was I, a little girl in my straw hat. You can see I was used to horses, can't you? I'm grabbing that farm horse by the head collar. And I was really Claude's little puppet. He wanted natural reactions from the children. He didn't want us to be theatrical or parrot-like. He didn't want to cast children who went to stage schools. He gave us things to do. So we were always busy concentrating on gutting fish or cooking or running around. And he didn't let us see the script, but here it is. And it was amazing when I first saw it, when, my mother had a copy. This is her copy. And someone gave me a copy. And I was like, oh my goodness, this is the script. And I'd never read it. And it was fascinating to me because I'm a writer now and I'm writing my own screenplays. Richard Pilbrow, the producer, had a heck of a job persuading Mrs. Ransom to give him the rights. Arthur Ransom died in 1967, aged about 82. He'd written the book in 1929. We were now 1973. David Wood, who is an actor, who'd been in the film If with Malcolm McDowell, he adapted the script, but very much with Mrs. Ransom on his shoulder. She really edited it. And he tried to add to the story. And if you read this script, you can see he tried to put in more jeopardy, which is what producers look for in a script. It didn't work at all. And we all knew the book, so we knew the dialogue from the book. And the script writer didn't come on location. He was in a play or something. And actually, he wasn't too fussy. We just clung to the story, and I think that was what made it. I think sometimes filmmakers try and push the story around, but David Wood said no. When you're adapting a book, so many people love that book. It was so much part of their childhood that we needed to be loyal to it. And we realized that our characters had become people's great friends, really important friends. And we had to walk into those pages and be their friends. And even now, the Arthur Ransom books are all available as audiobooks in various forms. Different people have read them, including Bernard Cribbins and Gabriel Woolf, major British actors. And I listen to them on long car journeys, and they're wonderful. They take you to beautiful places, and the writing is so good and so well-rounded that as an adult or anyone of any age, you get, it's a true escapisms, but they're tangible adventures. They're not too wild and wacky. They're things that you could possibly viably do, go camping in the Lake District or take a cabin cruiser through the Norfolk Broads. It's not impossible. It's not out of reach. It's not sci-fi. And you end your journey, they give you a place of solace, a peace. And we didn't realize that the film would also have that quality. It took us 7 weeks to make it on location. We stayed in a guest house in Ambleside, and We were driven in a minibus to location every day. I wish we could have stayed in background farm, actually. They thought we needed to be in a town for some reason. Um, but they recorded about 4 minutes a day of the finished edited film. Our first assistant, David, can't remember his name, had worked on the Carry On films, working much faster, but in studios and studio lots where they can record about 9 minutes a day. That's, I think, equivalent to what they do for the exterior shots on EastEnders. I haven't calculated it, but I worked on that later. And then, because this was a major feature film, we took it back to Elstree Studios in Boreham Wood, where Bill Rowe, who was an award-winning, Oscar-winning sound technician, dubbing mixer, put on the sound, and he used sound to illustrate Titty's imagination. So I hear in my imagination parrots, and he'd add the parrots or the monkeys or the sound of the wind in the palm trees. And you kind of don't notice it as a viewer, but you get wrapped into Titty's world, into her, what she's envisaging when she's thinking she's a shipwrecked sailor. So that quality was added. They had the dinghy, Swallow. Where is Swallow? Here's her flag. They had the dinghy that they bought in the sound studio. They built a pool for her so they could get the sounds of the lapping water. Swallows and Amazons, the story takes place a lot at night, and because the weather was so bad, we'd shot some of the night scenes in a barn, blacked out with drapes, the night sailing scenes, and when Titty's alone at the camp, all that had to be shot in Mrs. Batty's barn at Background Farm. But when they added the sound, even when I'm watching the film now, I think, God, they're sailing at night. And I know they weren't. It was also because Simon and Susanna acted, they performed that so well. I just had to sit by the campfire. But again, the prop men, they built a real fire in the barn. So it wasn't, it seemed real at the time. So there was this kind of magical quality put into the film based on Arthur Ransom's works and his heritage. And it goes reeling back in time to when he was a boy and he would, with his three brothers and sisters, be taken up to the Lake District on holiday by train. And they stayed on a farm in the south of Coniston Water. And his father went fishing. We didn't shoot the fishing scenes on Coniston Water. We shot those on Elter Water. I don't know why. But it's quite fun. And you can stay now at the Elter Water Youth Hostel and go and find the locations yourself. It's viable, it's something you really can do. If you've got a canoe to get out to Peel Island. But there we were. We had one pickup shot to do at Runnymede, which was actually the opening shot when Titty first sees the island and imagines it, and you see the opening graphics. Before long, we were publicising the film. We were on a float at the Lord Mayor's show. It's coming up soon. And we were invited to the preview. And when we first saw that film, it was like, oh my goodness, it's so sunny. Was it that sunny? No. And so all the hours we'd spent waiting around for the clouds to pass and the sun to come out, which the director of photography had absolutely insisted on. And the whole reason why we got bored hanging around and got so cold, it didn't matter because on the screen it looked like the ideal summer holiday it was meant to be. Sadly, the journalists who they invited to the preview weren't invited to bring their children. And there's a couple of left-wing journalists who infuriated Arthur Ransom's biographer by saying that Arthur Ransom was right-wing, which was not correct because, if anything, he was quite a Bolshevik sympathizer. He married Trotsky's personal secretary and brought her out of Russia just after the revolution, and never employed anyone to help in the house or anything. So we didn't get very good reviews, but it was shown on mainstream cinema. And at the time, I can remember my father wondering if he could ever afford to buy a 35mm copy of the film, and he really wanted to, but they were so expensive. And I'm glad he didn't, because they're a real fire hazard and difficult to store, because it was screened on television, and it worked really well on television because Arthur Ransom broke the story down into 3 strands. The swallows do this, the Amazons do that, and Titty does the other. And if you think of 1979, it's a long time ago, but television programs and films up to that point had been very lateral. That one thing happened and another happened. They were very linear, like A Town Like Alice that Virginia McKenna had been in. Just a story without any flashbacks or breaking into strands. And then they made, John Mortimer wrote Rumpole of the Bailey, and he broke the story into 3 strands. And now you've got every soap opera with lots of different plots and strands going. So Swallows and Amazons was groundbreaking. It worked well on television, and it would be screened on Christmas Eve, New Year's Eve, Good Friday, and it soon came out on VHS. And people began to record it off the television, and they'd started watching these really bad recordings on VHS, and then DVDs came out. And 10 years ago, Studio Canal remastered it with DVD extras. That's what the best quality DVD one looks like. That's the French one, and on Blu-ray. And they brought out this cheaper version with the original poster on it, poster painted by Arnaldo Puzzu, who painted the Michael Caine posters. And it did very, very well on DVD because families like using it as a babysitting film, really, because it's a classic, it was edifying for the children to watch. And the Daily Mail gave a whole load of DVDs away for free. That kind of helped.
Hello.
And I would
Can you hear me?
start meeting people who were telling me that they'd watched the film 30, 50 times.
I'm just watching a Zoom meeting. I'm really only watching.
Oh, I've got someone coming in there. So we ended up with a film that people were very familiar with, and I hope that it's helped children introduce children to the books, which are amazing. I was very fortunate because although I didn't want to act, I was in another feature film, and then I got the chance to become a graduate trainee at the BBC, and I went into television production. And one of the first drama I worked on was the BBC adaptation of Arthur Ransom's books, The Big Six and Coop Club, which I cast the children. That's Henry Dimbleby, who's now a restaurateur, has a shop does fast food called Leon. And Julian Fellows was the baddie, and Rosemary Leach, who'd been inside with Rosie with me and Stem, she played Mrs. Barrable. And we used these wonderful cabin cruisers from Hunter's Yard near Ludham in Norfolk, and a little dinghy called Titmouse. And our news is that the Arthur Ransom Society has been able to acquire the boats, Swallow and Amazon, our boats that we used in the film, and they have renovated them, are renovating them for anyone to go and hire and use. And you can also get some sailing lessons. They have volunteer instructors on the Norfolk Broads where we made this. So you can also hire this cruiser and the Titmouse. It's not that far from London. The Norfolk Broads are less blustery than the Lake District. And so it's made it possible to keep that heritage going, which is really exciting. So the Arthur Ransom Society is the second biggest literary society in Britain. I don't know about the world. Tolkien's the biggest one, and it's got about 1,000 members, and they do a lot. They lay on a lot of events. So a lot of family members, they go and find the locations, and they'll have Arthur Ransom or Swallows Days at Hunter's Yard. And this year was the 50th anniversary of the release of Swallows and Amazons. And thanks to the legacy from the members, we had that wonderful weekend at Windermere Jetty, which is the Steamboat Museum in the Lake District. And it was this, anyone could come for free and meet the cast. And John Sargent is now the president. You know, he was a foreign correspondent like Arthur Ransom, and he interviewed us. And the makeup designer who'd become Harrison Ford's makeup designer and Sigourney Weaver's makeup designer. He started with me. Not that I wore much makeup. The other characters did, like you forget when you're watching the film because you can't see it, but the charcoal burners needed a bit of smudges of soot. And Virginia McKenna just had her lovely hair pinned up. She didn't wear a wig or 70s makeup or anything. So we had a great weekend where the past chairman told people about Arthur Ransom's influences on his life and how Swallows and Amazons came to be written and how it took off eventually. And he wrote this series of books that were of national importance. I mean, he was generating income for the government through World War II. And they are still bestsellers. They are still in most of the British bookshops. They have a little teacher's pick approved notice on Amazon. And what we see is that the Arthur Ransom books, they're not your first reading books, but they're very good for reluctant readers. And particularly little boys warm to the fact that they are about camping and getting outdoors and exploring and sailing. And if you read them, they help you learn to sail because Arthur Ransom loved sailing. He was a great sailor and fisherman. And through his books, he actually teaches you a bit about those subjects, along with bird watching and climbing and walking on the moors, as well as a bit of mining, actually, and forest fires, all sorts of different topics. And the Arthur Ransom Society give grants so that children can be supported financially to learn some of those skills or partake in some of those activities, because sailing lessons are expensive. And a lot of the members are retired teachers, and I'm hoping that they will join School Readers and be able to introduce the Arthur Ransom books to the next generation, because they are inspirational and they're kind of a good introduction to the other classics, if you like. So we're all working towards a love of reading and a love of books and finding solace in books. And people write into me, and some people say they watch the film of Swallows and Amazons every week. We had a 50th anniversary. It was rather nice. We had a 50th anniversary Q&A at the Cinema Museum in London to celebrate the premiere of the film. This was the programme that we had at the premiere, the original premiere in Shaftesbury Avenue. And after the Q&A, they invited questions from the audience. And this chap stood up and he said, "I'm a doctor. And when I was a young houseman, I was having to do my hospital visits on Good Friday." He said it was extraordinary. I walked into the hospital and it was quiet and peaceful. And I walked through the wards and all the children were snuggled up and happy. And Swallows and Amazons was on television in every ward. And he walked from one ward to another and the children were all peaceful. And he said, "You gave us that, gave those very sick children that gift." And Audrey Hepburn said, "You know, films are such wonderful ways of giving people respite. And so if we helped 6 children, it was worth the cold days we spent hanging around on location in the Lake District." But it was also an amazing experience for us. It was educational. I got a bit behind in my maths, but it was good for me. And it has influenced my life quite considerably. And I think I hear all the time from people who say Arthur Ransom influenced their lives in the most incredible ways. And I mean, Ellen MacArthur ended up sailing around the world after reading the books, Ben Ainsley. And actually, on my blog, I've got collections of all the people who, for them, Swallows and Amazons was foundational. And apparently, our film was our late Queen's favourite film. So I wish I'd been able to take her to some of the locations. That would be nice, wouldn't it?
Sophie, thank you. That was absolutely wonderful. This is the third time you've done it, and it's all different. You give so many different bits of information and story. It's wonderful. So thank you. Should we give Sophie a little round? Thank you so much. Fascinating. And you mentioned a love of reading, and that Arthur and they engender this wonderful love of reading. And school readers, our volunteers, some of you are here this evening. That is what our volunteers particularly do, because they are not a teacher or a parent, a bit like the person who supported you one-to-one to help you when you were a child, Sophie. They have a very special relationship with children in schools. And one of the things they absolutely engender is this love of reading, because if they go in weekly, they care, they're there for the children individually. And we measure it. We measure our impact every year. And love of reading is one of the major improvements. And love of reading has been shown in many, many studies to be the key factor in future success, not the ability or the level of reading, but your love of reading. And I think that's what Arthur Ransom, his books, the film as well, and our school readers do. So it's so lovely having you as our legacy ambassador, because what we are trying to do and what the Arthur Ransom books have done and what you've put over so well this evening is on the same page, as it were. That's rather a good way of putting it. So really lovely to have you give that talk. So thank you very much. Sophie to be our legacy ambassador is such a lovely thing for us. And I know Sasha wants to just close with a few points about legacies. So Sasha, over to you.
Thank you, Jane, and thank you so much, Sophie, for your talk. You've been amazing. 3 talks in 24 hours is fab. So yes, Sophie is our legacy ambassador. And Sophie is one of the very generous people who have chosen to include school readers in their will, which is a wonderful way of supporting school readers and making sure that your commitment to children's literacy lives on without making any gift today. We would never expect you to or ask you to leave a gift to school readers without considering your friends and family first. And we'd also never pry if it is something that you want to do and you choose to tell us, then we're always delighted, because it means we can acknowledge and thank you within your lifetime. And that's why we've established the Story Ahead, which is a stewardship group for our group of legacy pledgers. We've got codicils on our website. If you've already got a will and you want to amend it, you can download those and print them off, or we can send you a copy. And that's a way to include school readers in your will. And we've also got a partnership with Fair Will, who offer a free will writing service online or on the phone. And details of that are on our website, or you can get in touch with me. I think you've all got my details now. But I just wanted to let you know, and I'm really glad that you could all attend this sort of hybrid event and meet Sophie and hear her wonderful first-hand experience, and also a little bit about school readers as well. So thank you very much for joining us, everybody.